First Responders Network. I'm Crystal Bailey, your host. We are live from IACP in Dallas, from the Axon booth on the expo floor. And I have here with me retired Chief Robert Handy. Tell me a little bit about...
Hi, Crystal. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tell me about your career. What have you done?
So I started my career in policing in Phoenix. So with the Phoenix Police Department, I was there a little over 21 years. I left there in 2011, went to California to be a chief. Was the chief in San Bernardino, California, and Huntington Beach, California, up until about 2 years ago when I retired.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you work with Axon now, right?
I do a little consulting with Axon. So I have a consulting business. I do expert witness work on use of force cases, do other consulting with agencies. So still involved in the profession with agencies. And then it's really been a pleasure too to work with Axon. I've known them since the early days when they first started, and it's neat to see how far they've come.
So given that, you had a little bit of an inside look into the goal that has been announced this week, the Moonshot goal to reduce the number of gun-related deaths by 50% between both police and the public in 10 years. I just want to know what you think about that goal.
Well, I think it's exciting because there's a couple of reasons that it's intriguing. One is I think something like that's finally achievable, right? I don't know that it would have been achievable if you'd have told me that 20 years ago with the technology we had. I probably would have chuckled or laughed out loud, right? It wouldn't have been something that I bought into. But I really think watching over the last 30 years of my career, watching the changes in technology, the improvements that we've been able to make, everything from, we started with the can of mace was the only thing we had, to all these other less lethal tools and things that have been developed. And then you get great companies out there like Axon that are working on technology to make our interactions safer, keep our officers safer, keep the public safer, and that technology's improved so much. We were one of the first major cities in Phoenix to roll out the first version of tasers and have everybody carrying them. And they were clunky, they didn't work as well. Now they're so much more effective. So just the improvement in that technology in this short period of time. And it seems like every time it's improved, it improves exponentially from where it started. So I think it's achievable.
Well, you talked about when you first started. You also, in a previous conversation, shared with me one of the first times you met Rick Smith. Tell me a little bit about how those ideas in the beginning, what were the thoughts from law enforcement community?
Well, I think early on, and I've told this story a few times, but when my first interactions with Rick, I was a lieutenant in Phoenix, and he was telling a room full of chiefs. I was coordinating a major city chiefs event for our chief in Phoenix, and Rick was explaining to everybody that he had his son was with him, and he had the first version of the Flex camera, and they just put the camera on the taser.
Okay.
And so Axon's always been a couple of steps ahead of things and was demonstrating the first on-body camera, but it was a big headset. It had like an iPad-looking thing, and connected by a large wire. And Rick's comment was every officer in the United States is going to be wearing one of these in 5 years or something to that effect. And we all chuckled, and nobody thought it'd be possible. Nobody thought we'd be there. I think one of the things we've always struggled with in our profession is we've never been funded properly for technology. We've never had the companies really building technology and researching technology for us.
Right.
It's always taking other technology and applying it to police. But now
that makes sense.
And Axon's been the leader in that of this is a law enforcement tech company that is building this for us and building this for our profession to make our men and women safer, and then make the people we interact with safer and reduce injuries and all the stuff that we're trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you have that background, that insight from your time at Phoenix. You mentioned that you've worked as an expert witness, or you continue to work as an expert witness, and you assess departments on use of force. Given the Moonshot goal is related to use of force, and what are your thoughts on how use of force can be changed, or at least the policies or the training surrounding use of force?
So I think that it's important when you talk about like the Moonshot goal, this isn't about just technology in the form of a less lethal weapon. It's really about improving our performance in our profession, right? Of how we perform as police officers. And it's been one of these things that we've improved it, but it's been in a very limited way and very slow over time. But all the changes that have come about, partly even because of cameras, quite honestly. So the evolution of cameras now, and so many people across the country wearing them, has caused us to get better, caused us to strive to get better. It's also helped us get better because we get to share with our officers what they look like on camera, what they're doing, how they could have avoided things or done things better. So I think that the technology, when we talk about that in the Moonshot goal, we're talking about improving training. We're talking about improving data tracking, right? And data analytics are so important to where to how we perform and how we can improve and how we deploy people and when we send people in, when we don't, when we take our taser out of the holster, when we take our firearm out of the holster, when we deploy pepper spray, whatever tool it is we're going to use. The ability to gather all that data and analyze it is exponentially helpful for us. We have a very difficult time in our profession, and we've always had this. We don't talk enough about ourselves and the good work we do, right? And our agencies aren't able to share that, given the first responder network, right? We struggle with that because that's not ever what we've been taught. We've been taught to come in and help and solve the problem and be humble and go on our way.
Yeah.
And I think that getting agencies to learn how to share their stories and of de-escalation, right? We've never tracked that before. We've never tracked how many good outcomes do we have. And I think we're learning. We're getting better at that.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about how modest law enforcement officers typically are. There's really not this sense of like, let me pat myself on the back.
Right.
And I do think that those cameras, you mentioned that they cause law enforcement officers to do their job differently, better. They know they're on, right? They have to perform a particular way. But it also helps, you've mentioned from our last conversation, also exonerate law enforcement officers and offer the positive things that, an officer could be in trouble for something and, hey, but we have proof that that's not how it actually went down. And it can be used in a positive way. And the FRN is obviously trying to do that by storytelling and reminding people that officers are human. But can you talk a little bit about that, about how maybe that technology has been used even in police conduct trials?
I think both with the good and the bad. Unfortunately, we've tracked and focused on all the negatives for years in our profession, right? So departments and chiefs, they track pursuits, they track uses of force, they track all those encounters that typically where injuries occur and other things. We don't do enough studying the good and how do we get more of the good and less of the more negative outcomes, right? How do we even study the positive outcomes to get more of those? And I think we're getting there now. We're starting to better understand as a profession how data improves us and how we can, and it started with all the ComStat style, using our data to deploy our resources. But now we're using data more to improve our performance across the board. Yeah. And it's early on in that. I'm excited to see the profession develop. And there's so many companies here at IACP that are working on things that are going to help us get better.
One of the things that, you're talking about is the data, right? Tracking everything. In a previous conversation or interview with Rick Smith, he mentioned that this is really his biggest goal that he's been able to measure. We have a timeline, we have a percentage, and we're trying to, there's a measurement, to get to. And, I think it's really interesting because you mentioned in our previous conversation tracking de-escalation, tracking positive situations. How do you think that those two align? Like, how do you think we can use what we're tracking positively to meet the goal?
So I think it's twofold. One, I think we get to share more of our positive stories, right? I think that's really important and get people to understand how complex and difficult our officers' jobs are, right? The men and women that do that job are making split-second decisions under extremely difficult circumstances all the time, every day. And to be able for people to understand that, that's an important piece. But the important piece of the data for us in the positive outcomes really is to also help us improve and make more of those positive outcomes, right?
Right.
So we always study the things that don't go well.
Yeah.
We don't study as much the things that went really well, and we need to really, we do a good job on that in some areas. Our SWAT teams do a great job on that. Some of our smaller teams do. But in general, as agencies, we don't focus enough on the good and how do we get more of the good. How do we get more of the good positive outcomes and avoid some of the other ones?
Do you have any thoughts on how to do that? How do we get those good interactions?
Well, I think that the de-escalation is part of that, right? So when we can measure what's working and how do we de-escalate situations, how do we keep the confrontation as it starts to escalate from continuing to escalate and stop it or de-escalate it. When we better understand those interactions and how they're occurring, we can intervene earlier on in the initial contact with the officer, right? Some of that's even through use of drones or other things that cause us or allows us to get more time and distance before it becomes confrontational. The drone as a first responder, Chula Vista Police Department started that years ago. One of the early examples they showed us in the California Chiefs Association meetings is they deployed the drone on a person subject with a gun call, and the drone is able to get overhead and show that the person's on a cell phone and not a gun. So before the officers even approach, they have better information, better
Right.
data, right? So all of those types of things that we're doing across the board in
Yeah.
policing, we got to bring those together. And I think that's the idea of the Moonshot goal, really, is all these things out there. Let's all partner. Let's all get together and find ways to make this happen, right? And we've done it with other things in our profession. But this is exciting because we've never really focused on the big problem we face
Yeah.
and lay it out and measure it, and we got to get enough people to unify behind it, obviously, to make it successful. But I think it's very doable.
Yeah, I mean, when you assess these departments or police conduct at a trial, I'm curious how often anybody's waking up and saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm justified and I'm glad it happened." You know, nobody's really.
So I don't know that anybody ever says it's glad it happened, right? Because
Yeah.
usually it's in a situation where somebody's hurt or injured. That's why
Right.
it's in litigation. But oftentimes it comes out in the favor of the officers because you're able to break it down and explain why things happen and get people to understand a little more the dynamics of the encounter, right? Because a 7-second video on national
Yeah.
TV doesn't explain all of that context for us. And by the time we get involved and try to explain it, we're trying to catch a narrative that's out there, right? But what we find in there is a lot of the cases I've looked at over the years, there's little ways and little changes that we now are starting to learn that could have changed outcomes.
Right.
The more of those we can learn and employ, right? The more we can train and employ some of those just little things that can change the negative outcomes that where our officers are getting hurt or people are getting hurt, the better off we're going to be. So I think the data is a huge part of it. Research and independent research is a huge part of this. We haven't even as a profession in the past been able to track our deadly use of force incidents.
Yeah.
We just haven't been able to do it as a
So-
country.
I mean, that's kind of my point was this, that nobody, even if it's justified, nobody really likes to go home that day and say that person lost their life. And I'm imagining anyway that
Yeah.
that might be the case for most officers.
I think so. I think society in general, we tend to focus on the sensational. We tend to focus on
Yeah.
the things that are wrong. It's negative, or that we want to critique or criticize, and it's human nature. But I think when we understand, and we even as practitioners in the profession and trainers and executives, the more we understand the dynamics of these encounters, the more we can impact the outcome. And I think we're getting there. There's a lot of great instructors, teachers, technologists, people out there developing things to help us. And who knows what's next? That's what's exciting, because technology changes so fast.
Yeah.
When I started, we didn't have cell phones. I drove around with a pocket full of quarters, and would have to go make phone calls from a payphone to call dispatch. It's just so different today. So much is at the fingertips of our officers.
Do you think that the needs of law enforcement have increased with existing society's technology, like social media, and the things that have moved forward in society? As a result, law enforcement needs more tools? Do you think that it's
Tremendously. Absolutely. And we keep expecting more and giving them more tools, more training, more technology, and
Yeah.
we're expecting all these wonderful things from them, and it's a little unrealistic sometimes, right? Because if you look at an officer's belt today, our smaller statured officers have a really hard time fitting all their equipment on. There's just not enough room on the belt to put all the stuff we expect them to carry. So a lot of uniform companies have adapted different things and made different things to carry equipment, but we have, as the technology's improved, our equipment's improved to keep our officers safe, so has the demand for them to use it, to train in
Yeah.
it, to be proficient at it. And then technology and all that's a whole nother level, right? When you talk about social media, government's never been good at spending money on technology, especially for police departments.
Yeah.
We haven't needed it historically, and we haven't been able to prove the need for it. The more data we gather, the better we get, the more we can show the value in investing in those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that it was hard. It's always been hard to have law enforcement, even internally, demanding these tools. It sounds like, and maybe
Yeah.
in the last 30 years that has changed. How do you think? I mean, you mentioned the future. How do you think things like drones or the things that are in the works in the next 10 years will aid law enforcement officers in meeting this goal? Like, what specific things do you think law enforcement officers need?
So I think for us in Huntington Beach, we started a drone program years ago, and it changed a lot of the dynamics of what we do. So instead of sending a person in to search somewhere and encounter somebody,
Right.
we can put a drone in there.
Right.
Right? Instead of
Streamlined.
walking through like a wooded area or a real thick area, you can get eyes on a drone first to scan it. They have thermal imaging on drones now. You can find people hiding in bushes with a drone. You don't have to send a police officer or a police dog in there. That's one very specific area where it's really helped increase our level of safety significantly.
Yeah.
But then you have to train them all. They have to get certified, the pilots. You've got to track all that data. You've got to get them the right equipment, and the equipment doesn't last as long. It's under tough circumstances. Government doesn't invest in those things a lot, and it's a constant. Executives who are doing budgets for policing are constantly trying to educate their policymakers of what it takes, because everybody, all elected officials, all city managers, and everybody want the good outcomes.
Yeah.
And it's hard to envision how investment, in millions of dollars or whatever the number is for an agency of equipment, how that translates into good outcomes, and it's never quick enough.
Yeah.
So we have to go and make the case. We have to get better at that.
And is it especially hard after 2020, where situations got even more turbulent between the public and law enforcement?
I think it did initially. I think we're getting past that wave now, and the crime problems we're dealing with all over the country now have brought attention back on and focus back on how do we get this better.
Yeah.
And I think we're doing better with that technology too, of preventing and intervening in crime. But this environment we're in now, where crime is rising across the country, it's never more important for us to get the technology tools that our officers need to do the job.
And I mean, I've heard through the grapevine, the rumors are that law enforcement can sometimes be resistant to change. Do you think that that's still true, or do you think people are willing to take on these new training methods?
So I think our profession overall, and if you look back in the last 50 years, if you look at the beginning period of that 50 years, we've been much more reluctant to change.
Yeah.
When I came on the job 30 years ago, people always said, the older people who were about ready to retire would say, I could never do the job today. There's too many demands. There's too many changes. And I was just not that way at all, right? And I find that the same way now. A lot of the people who are retiring are frustrated, and they didn't want to change, but the newer people we're getting in, they're brighter than we ever were. When we came in, they're smarter, they're more technology savvy, they're more willing to use technology, they're more willing to lean into change. And I think we're seeing that now as they gain experience in their careers. That generation is changing our profession. And quite honestly, we've had to. And a lot of it's because of the technology we brought in with cameras. And once you start seeing these encounters on camera, it's forced us to get better.
Yeah.
So we see it in our profession, and the public sees it. Prior to that, we'd go out to a use of force incident, say an officer-involved shooting. And the officer tells their story, and we get to look, and the officer only has a very limited perspective as well. But when you have cameras and surveillance cameras and all these other things involved, we get a much more accurate picture, and we can get better from that accurate picture, where we just didn't have it before.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how as time changes, as you mentioned, even the younger generation, the people who are coming into law enforcement today are Gen Z and millennials. I mean, probably Gen Z, because millennials are a little older now. But, it's a matter also of probably recruiting and making sure, because I know that there's also you mentioned that there's an issue with, or I guess I'm mentioning that there's an issue with getting people to join law enforcement, it seems right now. But do you think that the technology is attractive? Do you think that because, I guess what I'm asking is, with younger people, is it inspiring a younger generation to join and to climb the ranks and become chiefs?
I really think it inspires them to want to be police officers, and everybody has a different career path in policing. Some want to be chiefs, some want to be a police officer and work in a uniform all day, every day for 30 years. And all of those, we need every single one of those people. Some gravitate towards they want to be a detective or an undercover person, or some, gravitate towards leadership. We need every one of them. But I think now we see this younger generation that is more willing to adapt and change and embrace technology than ever before, but they don't know what we do. So we have to get over this narrative about the police with that generation. That's why I think we're having a little struggles hiring. It's twofold. Part of it is in a really good economy when unemployment is low, we've always historically struggled.
Oh, I see.
So that's already, we have shift work, holiday work, plus the physical demands and the danger and all the other things that come with law enforcement. You add in the layer of public scrutiny and the other image issues we've had over the last 3 years. That's part of it. But I think we're starting to get over that. And I think when young people start to understand the nobility of our profession, we've lost the ability to sell that nobility still and get our younger people to feel that and to That's why we all did the job for so long, and why so many of our people do the job is the nobility of our profession, the meaning behind it. And people want to do meaningful things.
Yeah.
We have to get that out, that narrative out more to them and demonstrate and show that value to them as a career.
Yeah.
And I think we're doing better at that. I think it's a rough economy. The image issues, everything's kind of come to a head. It's going to get better. We're going to continue to get better at recruiting and telling our story to our recruits. We have to recruit differently now too. It doesn't work to hand them a job flyer at a college fair anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, concept of nobility. You guys are serving the communities that you're in, and it really is a noble career.
This has been my life's work, and I've met countless number of men and women in this line of work who have given their absolute lives to this profession for the nobility of it, the meaning of it.
Yeah.
They've sacrificed I've seen people sacrifice their lives for it. Their families sacrifice their loved ones' lives for it. But more on a larger scale of numbers are just the little sacrifices that men and women make to do this job all the time. The day-to-day grind, the stress, the difficulty, the equipment they carry, the shift work, and they do it because they love it.
Yeah.
They love it, and it's in service of others. It's in service of the community. And they feel it. And I think that's when we can sell that, and I don't mean sell it, when we can get people to sense that and see that, then it changes everything. I never wanted to be a police officer. I was a biology major in college. And I think when you see a lot of people get to understand our profession better and what it really means, and they can experience part of it, that's why it's so important to things like the VR simulator, right? Or Citizens Academies, the other things we do to get people to understand our profession, the more people are going to want to join. Because they can relate to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now, so you think the Moonshot goal is doable. You believe in it.
Absolutely, I do.
And that means a lot because you're a use of force expert. You're the person that...
Well, I think I've seen a shift in a momentum in our profession, really, where we are now focused much more on it than we've ever been.
Yeah.
And part of that's because the public is demanding it, right?
Right.
And we've always been, I shouldn't say always, we've tried as a profession to be responsive to the public, right? But the public has never been more clear on what they expect of us, and they want better.
Yeah.
And I think our governments now are more willing to invest more in us to make us better. Police departments cost more now than they ever have. Our people are better educated, better trained, and do a better job than we've ever done. So we're getting there. And I think when you see how quickly technology has advanced and Axon and other companies working on it, and I want to stress that too, because there's so many others out there doing great work that we can bring to this goal.
Yes.
And that's where we all have to come together, right? And so many agencies can bring their experts. We don't, even as an expert, you don't have all of the answers. And there are innovative trainers and innovative people out there in our profession right now doing things that are making a difference. And going to make a difference and going to change our profession. That's what's exciting. That's what keeps us going. That's what makes something like this so reasonable in my mind.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
well,
I'm excited.
You. Yeah, I'm excited too.
Excited to watch it, from the cheap seats now. So.
Well, thank you for your time and for sharing that expertise and that insight. I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody here at Axon appreciates your insight.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the next interview we'll be having is with retired police chief of Dallas, Renee Hall, and London police officer Saul Glick. The two of them will talk to us about how important community is as they work on some things at Harvard. So you'll be excited to hear about what they're working on. So stay tuned.